Bullshit. Bullshit is the name of that wonderful Penn and Teller television show that had our next speaker as a guest. Why was she invited? Because she is an articulate scientist with a controversial view that only science should be taught in science classes. In her many travels around the country, Dr. Genie Scott exposes her audiences to plenty of bullshit. Not her arguments, but those that come from creationists. She persuasively argues that you can't be scientifically literate or an educated member of society if you don't understand the rudiments of evolution. As founding director of the National Center for Science Education, Genie Scott is an expert in both the science of evolution and the politics of evolution. For her outstanding work, she has received numerous honorary degrees from prestigious universities, but she has not acquired any honors from the Answers in Genesis Creationist Museum in Kentucky. As you know, creationists like to appeal to authority, promoting those few people who are both scientifically credentialed and doubt evolution. As a clever parody, the Center for Science Education created Project Steve after Stephen Jay Gould, consisting of hundreds of scientists named Steve who support evolution. Now, there may not be as many Eugenies as there are creationists, but the sum total of their scientific evidence is no match for that of Dr. Genie Scott. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott.
Well, indeed. I'm here. The title of my talk is Who Pulled the Stake Out? And I'm here to talk about the resurgence of young earth creationism, a movement that we thought, ideally, was already dead and gone. But in fact, creation science is still around. And remember creation science? Henry Morris, the Institute for Creation Research, the Creation Research Society, Answers in Genesis with Ken Ham, the Australian branch, shall we say, of the creationism movement, inspired by American young earth creationists like Henry Morris, but now come back to the United States to missionize us. The folks who brought you the truly zany science of young earth creationism, based upon the biblical doctrine of special creation, in which God created all the creatures on the earth, plants and animals and humans, specially in their present form and all at one time. So dinosaurs and human beings and all the mammals and pteranodons and pine trees and bryophytes and everything was created all at one time as we see them today. That's the doctrine of special creation. So if this is your belief, then you expect that the fossil record, the geological column, that the evidence of science is going to reflect this. So especially interesting in young earth creationism is, of course, the young earth component, in which they believe that all of this occurred within thousands of years, 6 to 10,000 years. Some of the more radical creationists will go all the way up to 14 or 15,000, but those are really the fringe creationists, because they're the ones who take the bristlecone pine dates seriously, but they're considered kind of off there in the ozone someplace. But one of the enthusiasms of young earth creationist movement is to try to demonstrate that dinosaurs and humans lived together at the same time, because obviously this would destroy evolution, as we know. It would be really tough for evolution to explain how it is that dinosaurs and humans coexisted. So one of their enthusiasms is finding evidence for human and dinosaur remains in the same strata, like these Paluxy River, Texas man tracks, as they call them, human footprints. Now, some of these are obviously carvings. This is a good example of something that is truly a carving. You would not mistake this for a genuine human footprint, the footprints in stone. But most of the footprints, even that aren't obvious carvings, she says, hoping that the computer works again. There we go. Even the ones that are not obvious carvings, even the ones that look kind of, lozenge-shaped and are, maybe this is something funny. Notice the scale on this. This is about 3 feet long. And it also happens to be at about the same depth as the dinosaur tracks. But this is not a problem because in those days there were giants in the earth. There are, however, real dinosaur footprints down there in Glen Rose, Texas, in the Cretaceous limestones, and they are quite abundant. And there are occasional scour marks or eroded dinosaur tracks that people have called man tracks for years, but these have been analyzed, and there really is no there there, so you don't really have to worry about human and dinosaur tracks coexisting in the same geological strata. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of young Earth creationism is flood geology. They believe that Noah's flood explains all of the sedimentary deposits on the planet, including the deepest portions of the planet like Grand Canyon, Tibet sandstone, all of those separate individual layers laid down by Noah's flood. And the highest mountains as well are a result of Noah's flood. Needless to say, this is a little tough to do scientifically. But that is the claim because this is creation science. This is the effort to take a biblical literalist view of how things came to be as we see them today and claim that there is scientific evidence and data for it. As you've read on Pastor Deacon's Fred website, the creation scientists have been very assiduous in presenting really bad science to prove that. This is supposedly the resting place of Noah's Ark in Turkey. Which was promoted by a number of creation scientists as being evidence for Noah's flood. And it is a very interesting shape, and it's about the 300 cubits long, etc., that the biblical dimensions call for. Unfortunately, from a geological standpoint, it's something called a syncline, which if you are a geologist, you will recognize fairly quickly. The claims of the creation scientists, of course, are really dreadful science, but it's not the science that really makes them successful as a popular movement. It is more their presentation of ideas that many members of the public seize upon as being believable and which are readily absorbed. How many of you have seen the Big Daddy tracks? Right, good old Big Daddy, Jack T. Chick. Well, one of the most famous Chick pamphlets is this little booklet called Big Daddy, which many of you have seen. It involves a dogmatic professor who is completely intolerant of the young Christian who appears in his class to challenge evolution. After a while, he finds that this young Christian is really coming up with really solid science that is shaking the confidence of the other students in the classroom about the validity of the scientific theory of evolution. And eventually, of course, this young man who is really quite pink-cheeked and well-groomed, as opposed to the rather shabby-looking professor, he does prevail and brings everyone to his religious point of views. You know, one thing about creation science comic books that's always just astonished me. I mean, what were they thinking? These are the only comic books on the planet that have footnotes. He's destroying me. Vestigial, little asterisk, vestigial, a shrunken part of the body that is no longer, they'll have footnotes to articles in science. I mean, it's just, there's just a scream in many respects. Well, creation science had kind of a bad patch in the early 1980s. In the late 80s and early, start again, Genie. Just washed my tongue, can't do a thing with it. In the late 70s and early 80s, there were a lot of attempts in the United States to pass legislation requiring that if you teach evolution, you have to teach creation science to balance it out. Balance is a big deal, speaking of rhetoric. And we counted 23 states that had such legislation submitted. The good news is the vast majority of these legislative pieces died in committee not on their own. I mean, it's because scientists and teachers and civil libertarians showed up to say, we don't want this, and persuaded the decision makers to vote against these bills. But Arkansas and Louisiana passed these measures, and there was a full trial in the state of Arkansas over Arkansas 590, the equal time bill that was passed there in 1981, and it was a marvelous experience. I'm going to talk briefly about the Dover, well, a little more actually about the Dover trial. But the McLean versus Arkansas trial, in many respects, presaged an awful lot of what we saw a couple of years ago in Kitzmiller versus Dover. In fact, when we were working on Kitzmiller, we kept having these McLean flashbacks because so many parallels were extant. And one of these days, I really have to write an article on that because it's a lot of fun. But what happened was there were a series of scientific experts for the plaintiffs, which is, from our standpoint, the good guy side. The plaintiffs were the ones who brought the case against the creationist bill. National Academy of Science members, extremely prominent scientists for the plaintiffs' witnesses. There were a group of individuals who were defense witnesses, scientists, but nobody had really heard of most of them except for an Englishman named Chandra Wickramasinghe, who turned out to be a real liability for the defense because under cross-examination he admitted that anybody who thought the earth was only a few thousand years old this was rubbish, simply rubbish, he said on the stand, which wasn't really good for the defense. And the lawyers for the plaintiffs simply outgunned the lawyers for the state and managed to get the witnesses for the defense to say some quite embarrassing things on the stand, in addition to calling young earth creationism rubbish. One of the theologians called by the defense did not impress the judge very much when he replied that he believed that UFOs were the result of Satan. And of course, when the judge issued his decision, the creation law was struck down, and people on our side of the issue were quite happy. Judge Overton ruled in McLean versus Arkansas that the methodology employed by creationists is a factor which is indicative that their work is not science. A scientific theory must be tentative and always subject to revision or abandonment in light of facts that are inconsistent with or falsify the theory. Judge Overton got it right. That is one of the more important aspects of science. And of course, creation science, or any kind of creationist, or any really ideological effort to do science from the perspective of X, Y, or Z is likely to fail. You have to be willing to sit down before fact as a little child, as Huxley once said. Well, the McLean decision, the McLean trial, was such a thorough rout of creation science that the state never appealed. So McLean never became a wide precedent for the illegality of teaching creation science, much as later on Kitzmiller versus Dover similarly was not appealed and is only precedent in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. But there was an equal time law, that of Louisiana, that did go all the way to the Supreme Court. And Don Aguillard, a science teacher in Louisiana, and other plaintiffs brought suit against the government. And the Supreme Court eventually heard arguments, heard oral arguments in the case Edwards versus Aguillard. And we were very happy with the results of Edwards because Edwards declared that the Creation Science Act impermissibly endorses religion by advancing the religious belief that a supernatural being created humankind. And so we were pretty happy about creation science. It really got the wind knocked out of its sails on a national level with Edwards versus Aguillard in 1987. There was a bit of a lag, and certainly in the late 80s and early 90s, and actually even today at NCSC, we do occasionally get school boards or legislation cropping up wanting to present creation science. And whenever we get a call from a school district like that, we just tell the school board member, the parent, or the teacher, well, why don't you ask your legal retainer what he thinks about this. And very, very quickly those laws disappear because any lawyer working for the school district is going to say, no, you can't do that. The Supreme Court has already spoken. Creation science is unconstitutional. That would be crazy to pass a policy requiring the teaching of creation science. So by and large, creation science as a creationist strategy has slipped away as a legal strategy and as an active classroom strategy. But for several years, there were attempts to test this. And at least in the first few years after Edwards versus Aguillard, some very interesting cases came up that used Edwards in their reasoning and which even more firmly solidified the argument about the unconstitutionality of creation science. And some of these you may not have heard of, so I thought it might be interesting to at least inform you about them. One was a case in the Chicago area, Webster versus New Lenox, in which a middle school, a 7th grade teacher, sued his district for his right, his free speech right, to teach creation science in the public schools. And the district court decision was very firm, as was the appeals court. And the court replied that, I'm sorry, I should back this up just a little bit. Remember that Edwards versus Aguillard was a decision about a policy top-down. The school district, or excuse me, in this case, the state of Louisiana had said, thou shalt teach creation science along with evolution. The Supreme Court said, nada. In the case of Webster, this was an individual teacher who was freelancing, shall we say. There was no policy in New Lenox saying, thou shalt teach creation science, but Mr. Webster just thought this was really great science and he was going to teach it anyhow. And the nice thing about the court decision in Webster versus New Lenox is the court said you can't freelance. An individual teacher who wants to teach creation science is violating the First Amendment just as much as if there were a policy at the school district level. So that was a very useful thing. A similar case that I think is particularly interesting to the people in this audience is a California case, Pelosa versus Capistrano. And yes, it is that Capistrano to which the swallows return. In the decision that the judge issued, which was Pelosa, similar to Webster, was arguing for his free speech and actually freedom of religion right, which was kind of an odd approach, to teach creationism along with evolution. The judge wrote, it is plaintiff's position, it's Mr. Pelosa's position, that forcing him to teach the religious belief system of evolutionism as a valid scientific theory would force Pelosa to become an unwilling agent of the school district in the establishment of the religion of secular humanism, in violation of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. This was a don't make me teach evolution case, which was a little odd. The judge was kind of testy in his reply. Charitably read, Pelosa's complaint at most makes this claim. The school district's actions requiring him to teach evolution establish a state-supported religion of evolutionism, or more generally, of secular humanism. We reject this claim because neither the Supreme Court nor this circuit has ever held that evolutionism or secular humanism are religions for Establishment Clause purposes. This is a good thing. The Supreme Court has held unequivocally that while the belief in a divine creator of the universe is a religious belief, the scientific theory that higher forms of life evolve from lower ones is not. This is a useful case to keep in mind if you are talking about church and state separation. So the Pelosa case, in summary, says that evolution is a scientific theory. Oh, good. Evolution is not a religious belief. That's really good. Secular humanism is not a religious belief for legal purposes, and that a district can require teachers to teach evolution as a valid scientific theory. In fact, there have been a number of other cases that I won't bother you with in which the courts have decided that if a district tells a teacher to teach X and Y and the teacher says, no, I only want to teach X, the district can discipline that teacher for not teaching Y. If a teacher is told to teach X and the teacher wants to teach Y instead, the district can say, no, stick to the curriculum. A K-12 teacher has very little academic freedom. This is the way the law works. Whether you like it or not, this is the way it is. It's not like the university level. And in every case where a teacher has argued for his academic freedom to teach creationism or some other idea that's outside of the curriculum, and the school district says, no, we don't want you to teach that, the courts have supported the district. A case that is particularly important to me in my line of work, especially these days, is a Minnesota state court where a teacher named Rodley Levake brought suit against his district because his district told him he cannot teach the evidence against evolution. He wanted to teach evolution, which was in the curriculum, but he also wanted to teach the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, which is something I'll talk more about in a little bit, because that is the current strategy. And his district said, no, we just want you to teach evolution the normal way, like they teach it in college. And so he sued for his right to teach evolution the way that he wanted to. And in Levake versus Independent School District number 656, the Minnesota Supreme Court said, plaintiff asserts a free speech right to teach the criticisms of evolution in the biology classroom. Plaintiff's position is wrong. Fairly straightforward in there. But you know, while all of this was going on, while creation science was getting hammered in the courts, we at NCSE, and probably many of you too, were getting much more interested in the new creationist kid on the block, which was something called intelligent design. Now, intelligent design actually got started about a decade earlier than most people noticed it. We did because we're fanatics, of course, at NCSE. But intelligent design actually got started in the early 1980s, at about the time that McLean versus Arkansas was going on, and it was really clear that creation science wasn't making the grade. It wasn't going to work legally. So how do you come up with an anti-evolutionism that works when creation science is failing? And a man named John Buell at a Dallas ministry called the Foundation for Thought and Ethics got together with a bunch of other conservative Christians to try to evolve a form of creationism that would be more effective than the floundering creation science. Now, they published 2 books. The first book was The Mystery of Life's Origin, which had to do with the origin of life. And in this book, the 3 authors, who were scientists and engineers, proclaimed that the origin of life is a really tough scientific problem, but it was more than that. It was an unsolvable problem. It was not only unexplained, it was unexplainable. That the origin of life was a special class of phenomena that was unassailable, unexplainable through natural causes. The only way, they said, you could explain that the origin of that first replicating cell was through intelligent agency. There had to be a designer of that first cell. This, of course, is extremely reminiscent to William Paley's argument from design. Remember Paley? He's the watch guy. If you see a watch, you know, because of all the ways the pieces of a watch fit together to tell time, you know there had to be a watchmaker, because there's no way that all the springs and wires and stuff in a watch could just spontaneously come together to tell time. There had to be a watchmaker. So, said Paley, when you see something complex in nature, like the vertebrate eye, there's no way that all of these pieces could have just come together accidentally, without design, without an eye maker, as it were. So, when you see something complex in nature, like the vertebrate eye, that tells you there's a God. William Paley's argument from design in his book Natural Theology was an argument for the existence of God. It was not a book intended to explain science necessarily. It was an apologetic. This is basically what intelligent design is. It is a restatement of Palean natural theology. It's the complexity argument requiring the intelligent agency, shall we say, and the agent spells his name with 3 letters, and I'll spot you the first. It's G. Okay. I like to let the proponents define the field. So I will let William Dembski, who's one of the main proponents of intelligent design, tell you what intelligent design is. In Bill Dembski's book, Intelligent Design, The Bridge Between Science and Theology, he says ID is three things. It is a scientific research program that investigates the effects of intelligent causes. He says that it is, number two, an intellectual movement that challenges Darwinism and its naturalistic legacy, and three, a way of understanding divine action. Well, you know, challenging Darwinism and its naturalistic legacy isn't a scientific endeavor, so that's not what we're going to talk about. Understanding divine action is kind of interesting, but it's not a scientific activity either, so we're going to talk about the claim that intelligent design is a scientific research program investigating the effects of intelligent causes. So, what is the science of intelligent design? Well, folks, keep your expectations low because the science is pretty thin. It consists of two ideas. One idea is presented by Michael Behe in his book Darwin's Black Box, and this is the concept of irreducible complexity. A related idea is presented by William Dembski in his book The Design Inference, and this is the design inference, or sometimes called complex specified information. Both of these are really talking about the same thing. Both of these, let's talk about irreducible complexity in a little bit more detail, but the design inference is quite similar. It's just a probability recasting of the same general idea. Irreducible complexity is a claim that there are, as Paley said, some things in nature that are really, really, really complex that cannot be explained through natural cause. But it goes a bit beyond Paley by saying that you can tell those particular structures because they have the quality that all of the parts of the structure have to be together at the same time before the structure will work. It is irreducibly complex. In Michael Behe's terms, it is a purposeful arrangement of parts like a human machine, that a carburetor or some other machine that we might make. All the parts of a carburetor have to be together before it will work. If you take away one part, your car won't run. I assume. I know nothing about cars. And somebody told me, what do you mean carburetors? Cars don't have carburetors anymore. What do I know about carburetors? I don't know. A mousetrap, that's Behe's favorite example. At any rate, so he says if you look at something like the bacteria flagellum, the little wiggly thing on the back of a bacterium that propels it, the motor of the bacteria flagellum is composed of about 40, 50 proteins. All of those proteins have to be together, or the bacterium just sort of lies there in the fluid. It doesn't go anywhere. The motor doesn't work. The bacteria flagellum motor is irreducibly complex. Therefore, it can't be built by natural selection. Natural selection, says Behe, requires that each of those 40 proteins of the bacteria flagellum have to be brought together one at a time like beads on a string, and there has to be a selective value for each of those combinations. So for the first two proteins, there has to be a value for this. And of course there is none because there's no selective value until you get all the proteins together at the end. And then the third one gets brought in, but there's no selective value for that either. So it's this highly improbable kind of combinatorial project that simply cannot work through natural selection. Therefore, when you see something that is this purposeful arrangement of parts like the bacteria flagellum, this is evidence that an intelligent agent, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, guess who, put this together. It cannot evolve, categorically cannot evolve through natural selection. Now there's a lot of my talks, I go into this in detail. The nice thing about speaking to an audience like this is I don't have to convince you that this is junk. You may not know why it's junk, which is fine because you're not all scientists, only a few of you are scientists. But you don't have to take my word for it. There's plenty of literature here available in the scientific literature, articles and books, where complex structures at the biochemical level, molecular level, cellular level, including even the beloved flagellum, have been examined by scientists, and very plausible natural selective and other natural ways of building these complex structures have been postulated, and they work pretty well. Well, as many of you know, the idea of intelligent design became quite popular during the 90s and it's still pretty popular actually, early part of the 2000s. And a school district in Dover, Pennsylvania passed a policy requiring that intelligent design be taught in the public schools there. A group of citizens sued the school district because they didn't want this religious view presented as science. This became quite a cause célèbre. In fact, it even appeared on The Daily Show, which goes to show what a cultural phenomenon this was. Not to spoil the punchline for you, but you all know that the judge ruled against the Dover policy and, to our delight, ruled that intelligent design, in fact, was not science. It was merely a religious view and was unconstitutional to advocate. Not to put too fine a point on it, the judge also awarded $2 million in costs to the plaintiffs, which was a bit of a warning, shall we say, to other school districts that this is not a good place to go. There were a couple of versions of the policy in Kitzmiller versus Dover that were involved in the lawsuit, but the simplified version of the lawsuit, of the policy passed in Dover, had two components. Students will be made aware of gaps/problems of Darwin's theory and be introduced to intelligent design. The lawyer for the plaintiffs there, Eric Rothschild, is holding a copy of Pandas and People, which was a book proposed for use in the Dover public school system. Now, NCSC, the organization that I work for, did work with the plaintiffs' legal team, and we helped to select the expert witnesses and assisted throughout the trial. Our expert witnesses consisted of, first of all, two scientists, Ken Miller and Kevin Padian, who were our first and last witnesses. We started and ended with scientists. We bookended our expert witnesses. Actually, we bookended all of our witnesses. We had fact witnesses scattered among the expert witnesses, of course. But we bookended the trial with scientists because we wanted to signal to the judge that we wanted him to look at the science. We didn't want this to be a trial just on, was there a religious purpose for passing this policy? We had a pretty good reason to imagine that that would be the case, that the judge would agree, because there was plenty of paper trail showing that the school board members did want to advance religion in this case. But we didn't want to go over the same thing 6 months later with a smarter school board. So we wanted the trial to be on this set of facts. So we really, really encouraged the judge, and we made science a big part of our presentation of the plaintiff's case. Ken Miller and Kevin Padian were our two scientists. We also had the philosopher of science Robert Pinnock, the theologian Jack Haught from Georgetown University, historian of, well, actually philosopher of science, but in a role of historian of intelligent design, Barbara Forrest, author of the wonderful book Creationism's Trojan Horse, and an education expert, Brian Alters from McGill University, who would be able to address the pedagogical arguments that we had to bring up. So what was our position? Well, we, of course, wanted to convince the judge that intelligent design was religion. That there was no secular reason for teaching intelligent design. I'm delighted that Eddie mentioned that that is the real criterion for deciding whether a bill or a law is unconstitutional. If there's a secular reason for, if you're feeding the kids because there's a good secular reason to not have hungry children, just because religious people say it's a good thing to feed kids doesn't mean you stop feeding kids. But if there's no valid secular reason for teaching intelligent design, then there's only religious reasons for teaching it, and it fails. And so that is the point that we had to make. And to demonstrate to the judge that indeed there was no valid secular reason for teaching intelligent design, we had to show the judge that intelligent design was not science, that its claims were false, and that in fact it did not follow the, quote, rules of science, in the sense that it was going about science in a very idiosyncratic way that was not recognized by the practitioners of the craft. And we also had to show, or wanted to show, that evolution is a very solid science, because we knew evolution was going to be attacked on the other side. So we also had to try to blunt what we correctly predicted would be the attack of the other side. Now the plaintiffs, and indeed, as this cartoon from the New Yorker says, for 6 weeks, the courtroom of Judge John Jones III was like the biology class you wish you could have taken. I don't know how many times a slide of the bacteria flagellum was shown to but after several witnesses at one point, it was actually a defense witness that was on the stand, and the same slide of the flagellum came up. And he said, well, I guess this is familiar. And the judge said, we've seen this before. But the defense expert witnesses included Scott Minnick from the University of Idaho, who's a biochemist, the aforementioned William Dembski, a philosopher of science and mathematician, Michael Behe, author of Darwin's Black Box, John Angus Campbell, who's at North Carolina, University of North Carolina. He's a historian of science. John Angus Campbell, who is a rhetorician, interesting man in many respects. Stephen Fuller, who is an American teaching at a British university, Birmingham, I think it is. Is that right? Sound familiar? I should know. And he is also a philosopher of science. And Stephen Meyer from the Discovery Institute, another philosopher of science. And Dick Carpenter, whom really none of us had heard about. He was truly the new kid on the block, and he was their education specialist. Now, what was their job? The defense had to defend the secular pedagogical value of teaching intelligent design. If they admitted, well, of course, it was a religion, they couldn't deny that, but they had to argue, like Eddie says, that there was a good secular reason for teaching it, and the good secular reasons is, of course, that ideas valid science. This is cutting-edge stuff that students would benefit from learning. And that evolution really is questionable science, referring, of course, to that gaps/problems in evolution component of the policy. So that is what they were going to try to do. And there were, of course, fact witnesses as well. There were plaintiffs. There were members of the school board. And we didn't win this case just on the science. There were school board members who were making some quite outrageous statements, like this gentleman. In the school board meeting, he said, 2,000 years ago, someone died on a cross. Can't someone take a stand for him? And then, of course, denied saying it, and also denied that it had anything to do with a religious purpose for teaching intelligent design. In one sense, we could probably have won this case on the venality of school board members alone, because there was truly a wonderful, may I just say, just because I talk a lot about legal stuff, but we don't want to sue anybody. The last thing you want to do is go to court. Sorry, Eddie, you're a lawyer. But the last thing, you want to solve these problems off stage, out of the light of publicity. You will never hear about probably 80% of the issues NCSE is involved in, because we solve these problems off stage. We solve them quietly without the press becoming involved, certainly without lawsuits. Lawsuits are expensive, they're exhausting, they're really exhausting. They take time away from things that could be done, more productive ways of improving science education. You don't sue if you don't absolutely have to. And actually, the citizens in this community worked very, very hard for months to try to turn the school board members around, and the members were just recalcitrant. The only recourse that the citizens of Dover had was to sue. That said, this was the perfect case. We were very, very happy to have the Kitzmiller versus Dover case to test intelligent design, because you had school board members like this who made these outrageous statements and clearly demonstrated the religious purpose. Plus, they lied. They lied in their depositions, they lied on the stand, and judges are really picky about that. One school board member claimed that he had no idea where the money for the to purchase the Pandas and People books came from. It came out that he had passed a hat at his church, and in the process of discovery in the case, the check that he wrote to a school board member to pay for the books with his signature on it came up, and it was sort of a, I forgot that. But when the case actually went to court, or I should say before the case went to court, there's many, many months of preparation, depositions of witnesses and plaintiffs and defense and all that, lots of stuff has to go on. We were preparing to depose John Angus Campbell. The lawyers were there at the office in Tennessee where Campbell was living at the time. And Campbell walks in with a lawyer from the Discovery Institute and says, "We withdraw our client." Campbell dropped off out of the suit just as he was about to be deposed. This was a big surprise to our legal team. And frankly, very soon thereafter, other defense witnesses began dropping like the proverbial small insects. Bill Dembski dropped out next. Steve Meyer dropped out, claiming that he had no confidence in the Thomas More Law Institute, which was the religious right-oriented legal institution defending the case. And Warren Nord was deposed and was scheduled to testify during the trial, but never was put on the stand. Mr. What's his name? Carpenter, pardon me. I just don't know this man. Mr. Carpenter, we understood, was there in Harrisburg, ready to be put on the stand, but the lawyers never put him on the stand. So basically, this is the case of the incredible disappearing witnesses. The only expert witnesses that the defense put on was Scott Minnick, Michael Behe, and Steve Fuller. By the way, John Angus Campbell has subsequently moved to Washington State, where he is now running for the local school board. Interestingly enough, if you Google John Angus Campbell, you will get pages full of professional work. He has a large publication record, and he is very well known as John Angus Campbell. In his school board suit, he is running as John Campbell, not even John R. Campbell. And there is no mention whatsoever about his books on intelligent design or his association with the Discovery Institute. All of his campaign materials are scrubbed completely clean of any sort of association. Possibly the citizens at North Mason might wonder if it's a good idea to elect a school board member who served as an expert, was to serve as an expert witness for a school district that did something highly illegal, but that's their decision. We don't get into politics. One of the very interesting things that happened during the Dover trial was in searching through NCSE archives, we found some old references and some old creation science literature about the writing of Pandas and People, or what we thought was going to become Pandas and People, given the people associated with it. It was Foundation for Thought and Ethics and Buell, and this sounds like it's going to be Pandas and People, but the titles of these books back in the early 90s, in the early and mid-1980s, were very creation-sounding titles. So we mentioned this to the lawyers, and the lawyers that afternoon subpoenaed any early manuscripts of Pandas and People from the Foundation for Thought and Ethics. I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall when that subpoena came in, because I have a feeling that FTE knew at that point the jig was up, and I'll tell you why. So, of course, to their credit, they sent us the manuscripts. Of course, the first thing we did was we scanned them. Now, I'm sorry for the detail here, but this is relevant. There's a really good punchline, so hang in there. down here on the x-axis, as we say in the scientific biz, we have the titles of the various early manuscripts of Pandas and People. Don't worry about it. It's the, you know, I sat in back last night. I couldn't see anything anyway, but that's okay. You'll be able to see the fun stuff. But just to tell you, the titles of these books are very creation sounding. First book is Creation Biology, 1983. The second manuscript, Biology and Creation, 86. Biology and Origins, 87. And then in 87, they changed the title of the book to Of Pandas and People. And there are two 1987 manuscripts. Remember that, because that's part of the fun, which we very cleverly here have called version 1 and version 2. And then in 1989, the first edition of Pandas and People was published, and then 1993, the second edition. Okay? Now, what we did, we got all these manuscripts. One of my guys is a good computer kind of guy. He wrote some scripts to do 5-word and 10-word scans across these manuscripts to make sure we're really talking about yes, we're talking about the same manuscripts. We could demonstrate that very clearly through a manuscript comparison. This is the same book in earlier versions. And then we thought it would be very interesting to see how many times the word creationism, creationist occurs. How many times does the phrase intelligent design occur? Because the book of Pandas and People was the first time the phrase intelligent design was used in its modern context to refer to this particular Palean movement. So we counted the words and we plotted them, and a most interesting thing happened. Even if you're sitting in back, you are probably guessing that the red line is the number of times that the word creationism or creationist occurs in these manuscripts. The blue line is when the term intelligent design occurs. And if I may call your attention to when they cross in between the first 1987 manuscript and the second 1987 manuscript of the book titled Of Pandas and People. Now, boys and girls, pop quiz. What happened in July of 1987? Edwards versus Aguillard, right? The Supreme Court case striking down creation science. Oopsie. All of a sudden, the word creationism disappears. Hypothesis, being as we are good empiricists, our hypothesis was that perchance they went through the manuscript and took out all of the words of creationist or creationism and replaced them with the phrase intelligent design. So we tested it, being good scientists. And what we found was in the early manuscripts a passage that read, "Creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, with their distinctive features already intact. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings, etc." And in all the early manuscripts, this passage occurs, pretty much as we see it. In the first 1987 manuscript, basically the same passage occurs. Creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator with their distinctive features already intact. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings. We're going to have a T-shirt with that made, I think. My friends, this is the missing link. And just to be totally redundant here, please note again, we're talking 1987, and you all have memorized now Edwards versus Aguillard is 1987. Here is the 1987 Pandas and People manuscript number 2. Intelligent design means that the various forms of life began abruptly through an intelligent agency with their distinctive features already intact. Okay, now let's have the chorus. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings, etc. In William Dembski's witness statement, he mentioned that he was the author of what would be the third edition of Pandas and People, but the name was to be changed. The name of the new edition of Pandas and People was going to be called The Design of Life. And so, since it was mentioned in his witness statement, we subpoenaed it. You know it's coming, don't you? I wonder, thought we, whether this fish with fins and scales is possibly in the design of life. Sudden emergence holds that the various forms of life begin with their distinctive features already intact all together now. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers and wings, animals with fur and mammary gland. We sort of spent about 3 weeks giggling around the office. Fish with fins and scales. When we presented these data to the judge, first of all, I should tell you, Judge Jones is a very dignified person, and he ran a tight courtroom. We were all extremely polite. The lawyers made sure that we were on our best deportment. They said, no eye rolling. No matter what ridiculous things you hear on the stand, you just sit there like little boy in Girl Scouts and mind your man. So we were really nice. We were really we didn't want to do anything that would, but I was sitting smack in front of the judge. I mean, I was sitting about as far away from the judge as I am to that camera. And I was watching him, and he was a poker face. You could not read this guy. It drove me nuts. There'd be all this testimony. I'd be watching, and no, I can't tell. So we showed him all these data, with the lines crossing and the fish with fins and scales and changing of the words and everything like that. And when we showed them when we showed the judge that slide where the lines do like this, one eyebrow went up. Yes. It was all I could do to control myself. So as you know, because I told you that in my first slide, we won. And we really won big. We didn't just win in the sense that an intelligent design policy is religious and so you can't teach it. We won because a judge decided that intelligent design was crappy science. And we really, really wanted that. We also won on the grounds, although it wasn't as strongly expressed in the decision as we would have liked, but still. We also won on the grounds that teaching the gaps theories in Darwin's, the gaps problems in Darwin's theory, teaching evidence against evolution, was really just a modern manifestation of creationism, and that is going to be hugely important for the next aspect of creationism, which was actually already brewing before Kitzmiller versus Dover. In fact, in our discovery of the issues in the case, we found that the Discovery Institute, which is the intelligent design think tank, a lawyer from there had corresponded with more than one of the school board members to try to talk them out of passing this policy. The Discovery Institute did not want. Don't try to read it, you'll go blind. It's a prop, but it's real. It's a court thing. The Discovery Institute did not want the Kitzmiller policy. They did not want the Dover policy. They maybe, I don't know what they think of Tammy Kitzmiller, but they don't want the Dover policy. They did not want a school board requiring the teaching of intelligent design. I think they figured out that if you call something intelligent design, a judge is going to say, and who is the designer? And then you get in trouble with the First Amendment. So instead, what they're promoting, as they started doing in the book by Jonathan Wells, Icons of Evolution, they are promoting instead the teaching of evolution, but balancing it with the idea that evolution is lousy science. So you teach the evidence against evolution. They have a brand new book out called Explore Evolution, which I call your attention to the subtitle, The Arguments for and Against Neo-Darwinism. There are a lot of euphemisms for this, which we're running into at NCSE at school board levels and state levels. Evidence for and evidence against evolution, strengths and weaknesses of evolution, teach evolution as fact, as theory, not fact, critical analysis of evolution, full range of views, and so forth. Well, so all that's well and good. We're still feeling pretty good, though, about intelligent design. We do have to watch out for evidence against evolution. But we really thought that creation science was kind of over and done with, right? The ICR is still around. The CRS is still around. Answers in Genesis is still around. But, you know, there seems to be a whole lot more creationist organizations springing up all over the place. This is the old-fashioned creationists have not gone into a hole just because intelligent design had a fluorescent. Unfortunately, this is almost an unending debate. And the traditional creationists, like the ICR, are actually expanding. If you have received the Acts and Facts, the little impact, these little small format 4x5 brochures that ICR has put out for years and years, in August you were probably quite surprised to find an 18.5 by 11 large format, very fancy magazine type publication from ICR that is far more expensive and far more attractive, and clearly these folks are expanding. In fact, they are literally expanding. The ICR is moving most of its operations from Southern California to Dallas, Texas. Now, they already have 3 buildings in Southern California. They have bought a 4-acre plot outside of Dallas, and they have 2 buildings already and conducting a capital campaign. The other thing that's going on is at Answers in Genesis, and many of you have heard about the opening of their $27 million museum, a 60,000 square foot institution. The other 30,000 square foot is offices, and that's really horrifying. The parking lot is chock full every single day since they've been open. If you go to this museum, you can see little fun things like get your picture taken on the little saddled baby triceratops. It's cute. They have very well landscaped grounds that you can picnic on, and they have lovely bridges and ponds and everything like that. And it's really, if you go to our website and Google AIG Museum, you'll get a whole tour. I won't take time to do it today. Obviously, the cartoonists had a really good time with the AIG Museum, but it says, "Boss, you better get down here." And our good friend Steve Benson, so simple-minded a creationist can understand it. I love Steve, but boy, he really has a sharp pen, shall we say. Now, the idea of museums, I think, is something that I'd like to tell you about, because there are lots and lots of creationist museums cropping up all over the country. The AIG Museum is clearly the fanciest, has the classiest graphics and the animatronic dinosaurs, but virtually any place you go these days, it seems like you can find a creationist museum. There's all these little mom and pop museums cropping up all over the place. The ICR down in Southern California was the first museum. It's not as fancy as AIG, but it's still a going concern. And one of the things that they're doing is providing parents with materials like this AIG aquarium guide, where you can run this off and take it into the real, secular real science aquarium, and correct the signage and correct the misinformation that your child might be getting by going to a secular institution. And they are also trying to establish, they have for a number of years been taking their own groups through museums like Denver's and the American Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian, and so forth. So they are using museums and the other informal science agencies as a way of promoting themselves. I want to call your attention briefly to something that's coming up soon in a theater near you, apparently. Some of you saw the article in the New York Times 2 days ago by Cornelia Dean, "Scientists Feel Miscast in Film on Life's Origin." It refers to a new film that is going to be released on Darwin's birthday, February 12th, with Ben Stein. The title of the movie is Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. In her article, Ms. Dean did not give the website. It's www.expelledthemovie.com. Take a look at it, and take a look over here in the lower right-hand corner at the trailer, because, not right now, but when you go to the website, click on the trailer and do watch the trailer. There's this little trailer getting into the site, but go through that and then watch the long-time trailer. You'll get an idea what this movie is about. This is a feature-length movie. It's going to be released in theaters, they claim. Not just DVD in church basements, but they are going to be promoting this as a real, genuine, theater adventure. This is not just a pro-intelligent design movie. This is an anti-science movie. Because the position that they are taking is that scientists are lying to you about evolution because they are all a bunch of atheists, and evolution is an important doctrinal position of atheism, and hence scientists are going to guard it and keep any sort of possibility of bringing God into science in, because they know that will destroy their whole ideology, they say. They're also claiming that there's a series of martyrs to the cause, intelligent design proponents, anti-evolutionists, who are being discriminated against. They are losing their jobs. They are not getting tenure. They're being crushed by the jackbooted heels of people like me. And you know how mean I am. And so it's a very disturbing movie. If you browse around on this website, you will find the class officers of Big Science Academy, including 4 people who are at this meeting. I must say, I'm sorry Richard isn't here, because the picture of Richard and I are, at least in my case, it's at least 15 years out of date, so at least we look fabulous, if nothing. But the whole idea here is that the scientists are all a bunch of atheists, and shades of Big Daddy, we are all rude and arrogant and dogmatic. Now, you can find out more about the creation and evolution controversy at ncseweb.org. If you go to this teaser box here, Evolution, Education, and the Law, you can find out a great deal more about what's going on legally. If you go to our newsroom, you will get to this page, and you can sort either by year or by state, find out what's going on in your own state. We try to keep this updated. It's a really depressing page. If you go to our resources page, you will find lots of information on creationism and intelligent design. And, you know, people are always saying, gosh, I didn't know it was a membership organization. Now you know. Okay. You can join. It's cheap, and you get a really depressing newsletter. And I do want to thank my staff. Some of you know these people, some of you have corresponded with these people, and they really deserve the credit for NCSE being the wonderful organization and effective organization that it is. Eric Mickle, Susan Spath, Glenn Branch, and if you are not getting Glenn Branch's Friday e-newsletter on creation and evolution, you are missing a treat. You can go down that series of teaser boxes on the right and sign up for it. It's really, really excellent. Our education outreach person is Louise Mead, PhD in evolutionary biology and a former classroom teacher. Our religious outreach person is a theologian, Peter Hess. Our brand new postdoctoral scholar of physical anthropology, Ann Holden, and Joshua Rosenau, a biologist whom some of you know from his blog View from Kansas. And yes, we are finally getting into the modern world. We are on Facebook. So go and join our Facebook group, and you can even see my Simpsonization. Thanks so much for inviting me to your conference.
Thank you. Thank you for an intelligent and entertaining talk on not so intelligent design.